Mark was our first baby for us. And we were very, very excited. And he was born August 1st, 1969.
So graduated from West, and then he was going to Madison area college, and then working at Howard Johnson's as a waiter. He lived at home until he was 21, because he would always want to move out. He came and he said, "Dad, I got all this money now. I think I can move out." So he did. We had some friends come from that used to live in our neighborhood, but then they moved to Oregon, and they came to town to visit. They were going to the UW game. This was September, and they had come also to share. They had just lost a son in a car accident, so Sharon wanted to talk with her about that.
So Ruth and I were at home, and I thought, oh my gosh, she wants to share with me about her son Michael dying in a car accident, and oh, that's so awful. I can't even imagine. How can I be a good listener? Because I've got one son that's moved out in an apartment and happy, and one off to college and happy, and I've got this 12-year-old daughter that's happy. How can I be a good listener? How can I even understand? So we went in the family room to sit down and talk, and the doorbell rang. Now, at this time, Jenny was up on the next street playing with her girlfriend at her home. And I said, "Oh, I'm not expecting anybody. I'll be right back." And I went to the door, and there were two men there. And they asked me, "Are you Mrs. Starkey?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, can we talk to you?" I said, "Well, I'm really busy right now. I've got company." Well, they wanted to know who was there. And I said, "A friend of mine." And I didn't realize why they were asking that until a little later. They then identified themselves as the coroner, and I don't know who the other person was. And they said a body was found, and they believed it to be that of our son, Mark. I said, "Well, that can't be possible because he just moved out 2 weeks ago." I already wasn't making any sense because I didn't want to hear that. So no, I'm going to push it away. And then they said, "Well, can we step in?" And I said, "Okay." And then Ruth came in. I called Ruth to come in the living room. And they told her what they had just told me. And she said, "I'll call Odana Golf Course right away and get a hold of the guys." And she did. And they paged Dell, her husband. And he brought Hank home, but didn't tell him. Why? We just have to go home, right? Something like that.
Or just on the first day.
And before Hank came home, our church, Bethel, already knew about this. And the way that happened was the man next door, who happens to be deaf, they went to him, and he was deaf, so he wrote on a piece of paper. They wrote on a piece of paper, "Do you know where the Starkeys are? Are they out of town?" He said, "I don't know." And so then he ran down the street to another friend of ours and brought Dave back up. And Dave talked to them and said, "Well, they're a member of Bethel Lutheran Church." So somebody called the church right away and got a hold of one of the pastors. And the pastor came to our house right away. When Hank came home, the pastor was there. So I remember Hank getting the news, and I don't remember how you got the news.
Well, when I walked to the house, you can walk past the front window, and I look and I was saying, "Why is Pastor Jake here now?" And there's two guys in there. And so I asked my friend. Of course, he kind of played dumb. He didn't know. So I come in the house, and then they told me what had happened. And they said, "You don't have to look at a picture because your wife had already identified Mark." So, I mean, that was it right there. So, somebody was already calling people for us, And it just appeared that out of nowhere, friends were coming to us to help us. And this was truly God telling us, people are here to help you. And it wasn't my fault, God saying, it wasn't my fault God got shot, but I'm providing you with people to support you and with you at this time. And that was really a blessing for us.
Before I looked at the picture, I said, is he beat up in any way? I couldn't bear to look at that. They said, no, he's not. It was just a picture of him, and his eyes were closed. And it was Mark. It was Mark. It was my son. Again, I was alone, but yet I wasn't alone. And I remember when Hank came home from the golf course, when he got the news, just he and I went in the family room, and he probably doesn't even remember this. I remember him just going, I knew he shouldn't have moved out. I knew he shouldn't have moved out. If he would have stayed here. You know, we had a light in our living room, and because our boys were the ages they were, the last one home at night would turn off the light in the living room. So if we woke up during the night and we could see the light still on, we knew that somebody was still not home. And it usually was off by, pretty early, 12, maybe 1-ish, but 12-ish. And I remember thinking, if this had happened and Mark lived at home and I had gotten up in the morning and the light was still on, what would I have done? What would I have done? I wouldn't have even known where to call, who to call. I wouldn't have known. And I remember Hank saying, he shouldn't have moved out. He shouldn't have moved out. And I remember, Hank, has nothing to do with it. Then I remember thinking right away, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son.
The situation was that after work, he had gone back to his apartment, changed clothes, and went out to downtown, State Street, with some of his friends to dance and have a good time. And when he came out to his car, Joseph Wills, who killed him, was standing by his car, and he asked Mark for a ride to the bus depot. That's how he had gotten here. Joseph Wills was from Louisiana. He was a drifter. He had drifted his way up to northern Minnesota, to up by Warren, Minnesota. And he had stolen a gun in Warren. So he got down in Minneapolis, and he was there a day or two, and then he heard about the gay community in Madison. And he was a homophobic, schizophrenic, as we found out later. So he hopped on a bus, got down to Madison. First person he sees is Mark. He asked Mark for a ride back to the bus depot. Mark said, sure, I'll give you a ride. So the bus depot at that time was down on Main Street behind Mott's Paint Company on the east side. And it was assumed out of his mouth, because Mark was dead, that Mark had tried to molest him some way, but it was proven later that he hadn't. And he pulled his gun, and Mark told him he wanted his CDs out of his car. So when he reached for his CDs, he shot him through his heart. And a bullet, I guess, had gone through his arm and then into his heart. So then he put him along the parking lot in Mark's and Mott's Paint at that time. And then he drove up by La Crosse with Mark's car. And for some strange reason, maybe this was God's plan too, I don't know, he called his mother in Louisiana and his mother convinced him to turn himself in. So he called the police, and we knew by midnight that the police up there had him, and one of the officers, 2 officers from Madison, were already on their way to get him. He confessed to the police all the way back, but he also said he would do it again. He would kill Mark again. I'll never forget, and I know it's in the church program, shall we say, that the pastors preach about forgiveness in the fall. And the first sermon that we heard
the next week
after Mark had been killed was on forgiveness. It was very hard to sit there and listen about forgiveness. And we almost got up and walked out, but we didn't. And we didn't because we were surrounded by folks that loved us. And the week before, on the Sunday Mark was killed, we were in church, and Pastor Bob got up there and he announced to the congregation what had happened. And here again, we were surrounded by people that Sunday after the Saturday of Mark's death. So, forgiveness, it's still hard, but it's changed through the years.
Oh, for sure. Forgiveness for Joseph Wills isn't something that I feel I really need to do. I think there's a bigger person he needs to answer to. People will say, well, you need to forgive to be able to go on. We have gone on. It's hard for me to say the words, I forgive you, Joseph Wills, because then I feel I'm not being loyal to Mark. But yet I remember just this spring, a pastor telling us, forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. And I remember when you told us that meant a lot. We will never forget, never forget. When Hank and Todd arrived home with his other men on Saturday night, it was 10:30-ish, 10:30 maybe. And Todd, I remember him telling me just not too long ago, there were lots of lights on in the house and there were cars out front. And he said, it looked like the Starkeys were having a party. It was far from a party, but we were surrounded. And when we went to church the next day, there was no question. We needed to be in church. And we can still look back and see how God was a part of our life right from the very beginning. I didn't know it at the time we were being taken care of by God. I look back later and say, we did as well as we did because of God, because of the people that loved us. And those are the people of God. And remember that a Sunday after, a week later, we were down having coffee after church, and it was so hard. And one of the pillars of church I said, I don't know what to even pray for anymore. He said, don't worry, Sharon, we're praying for you. And that was like a huge comfort. And our kids have done remarkably well, but they've learned from all of these experiences. When you lose a child to death, the divorce rate is quite high. And when it's murder, it's even higher. Because of our faith, we still have each other, and that we've held together. For myself, but for him, both of us, and for our children. Even thinking back to the first Christmas after Mark died, 3 months later, it's Christmas. Okay, are we going to put up a tree? Yeah, we have to, because Todd's coming home from college, and we have this 12-year-old. We have to go on living. And I think God's been a big part of that. And I am thankful every day. I've never been one to blame God, because God wouldn't want this to happen. The God we believe in does not want bad things to happen to anybody. Sometimes they just happen. And then He's there to support. And so I think our faith has been pretty strong. The other thing we did do was we joined a support group right away. It's called Parents of Murdered Children. And we went the very next month, met some wonderful people. And after 2 years, the leaders asked us if we would take over the support group. We led the group for 11 years. When you're helping other people, you're also helping yourself.
Love, faith, and hope were always our focus, I think, and that's what got us through all of this.